The stories you'll hear aren't made up. They come from real people, people who saw things they can't explain, heard things they wish they hadn't, and lived to tell us what happened. But after you listen, you might wish they hadn't, because some truths are better left buried. I never thought I'd tell this story out loud. For years it lived in the margins of my life, a quiet, annoying hum in the background that I learned to tune out. Now, after what happened last month, I find myself staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., remembering small things that add up to something I can't quite name. Maybe talking about it will make sense of it. Maybe it will just make sense to someone else who has lived through the same kind of slow, patient wrongness. I lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a 3-story brick building. It was the kind of complex where people kept to themselves, students, a couple of nurses, an older man who fed pigeons on his balcony. The landlord was polite and never intrusive. Rent was cheap for the neighborhood, and the noise was mostly the usual. Traffic 2 blocks over, the distant hum of a train, someone arguing outside at 2 a.m. every other Friday. You get used to those sounds, they become a background you can sleep through. The first odd thing was a sound, not a sound, exactly. The hall outside my door would sometimes have that thin metallic scrape you get from a cart being pulled. Only there wasn't anyone pulling a cart at 1 a.m. There were also steps, soft, measured like someone walking with a purpose, but not in a hurry. I noticed it the first winter I moved in, and assumed it was one of the neighbors coming home late. If I opened the door 2 inches, the sound would stop. If I looked out, there would be no one on the landing. It never lasted long, just enough to make the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I told myself it was nothing. The walls were old. People forgot things in the hall and came back for them. But over time, the times and patterns changed. The sound started coming at 3 in the morning almost every night. Sometimes it would start at 2:58, sometimes at 3:06, close to 3, like someone checking a clock. The cadence of the steps remained the same. 5 light steps, pause. 5 light steps, pause. I kept a little voice recorder on my nightstand for a week to catch it. The file from the second night was all static, and then at 3:01, 5 distinct footfalls, a pause, 5 footfalls, then the recording ended with the kind of cutoff you get when a battery dies. I chalked the cutoff up to me, tired and clumsy, but I hadn't stopped the recorder. On a Thursday, I woke to find my bedroom window open. I live on the 3rd floor. I always locked it before bed. The chain latch was latched. The lock was intact. On the sill, tiny smudges of dirt. Not muddy, like powder rubbed into the paint. I thought at first maybe it was from the outside ledge or that a bird had hit it, but there were no feathers and no marks on the glass. I cleaned it off and made a mental note to call the landlord to check the latch. When I got to work, I found an email from him that said maintenance would come by Monday. He apologized for the delay. "Old building stuff," he wrote. After that, the sounds stopped being something that happened outside my door and started happening in the apartment. I would wake up and find the kitchen light on. Not fully on, a faint glow like someone had been in the room and turned on the dimmer halfway. Once I found that all the spoons were stacked in the same mug I used to keep utensils by the stove. But the regular mug I used for coffee was in the sink. Nothing was missing, nothing was broken. One evening I came home and the TV was tuned to a news channel I never watch. The volume was low, the anchor's voice was a low hum. I turned it off and went about my life, but I noticed more things. The bathroom door left ajar, the bathroom mat folded up on one corner, as if someone had stepped on it and then left it. That way a single shoe on the living room rug facing the door. I told a friend about it once. He laughed. "Maybe you're sleepwalking," he said. Try not to be dramatic. He was right to laugh. The rational explanations were always the ones I tried hardest to believe. Sleepwalking, older neighbors, a careless maintenance guy. But all the rational things never had the rhythm that this had. Whoever, whatever, moved around my apartment always seemed to be listening for something and stopping when it felt like it might be heard. The pattern that finally broke me wasn't loud. It was small and careful, and the kind of thing only someone who knows a place well would do. I have a stack of books on my nightstand. A paperback I was halfway through, a grocery list folded in half, a tiny photo clipped to a receipt. One morning I woke up, and the paperback was open to a page where a pressed flower I had once tucked in the book had been. It wasn't mine. It was a strip of paper folded very small, like the sort of thing you'd make when you didn't want the writing to be obvious. On it were 4 words in ballpoint. Don't look. The ink had bled slightly, like it had been pressed under humidity. I thought perhaps a friend had been in my apartment as a joke. I texted 3 people. No one had been there. I called the landlord and asked if he had anyone in my unit for a check. He said no. He had sent the maintenance guy down the hall to fix a plumbing issue in Unit 3B last Tuesday. He apologized and promised again to check the locks. That night I sat awake with the lights on. I don't mean the living room lamp. I mean every light in the apartment. Kitchen light, bathroom light, closet light if I had one. I sat and listened. At 2:57, the building's old heating system clicked. At 2:59, I could hear the faint hum of someone moving on the landing below. At 3:01, the 5 steps came, light and deliberate. They stopped in front of my door. A soft scrape like a hand sliding along the wood. I held my breath. Nothing happened. The steps retreated. I started taking videos with my phone when I slept. I put it on the dresser, camera facing the door with the night vision mode on. The footage from 2 nights in a row showed nothing but the room in the low green tint and the moonlight through the blinds. Then, at 3 hours 0 minutes and 58 seconds, 5 seconds of static, not digital, like a physical distortion in the imaging, and the room frame shifted. For a hair of a second, the door looked darker, like someone had stood just beyond the threshold. The figure wasn't visible. It was a pocket of shadow that didn't belong to any object in the room. The audio recorded a soft whisper I couldn't make out, then silence. When I watched it back, the hairs on my arms prickled. The way the camera caught the shadow made it seem less like a person and more like a space where light refused to be. I considered moving. It wasn't easy. I'd only been there a year, and most places I could afford were equal compromises. I made plans anyway. I put a deposit down on a new place, started clearing drawers, boxed up clothes. The day before I was supposed to sign the lease, little things escalated. My phone vibrated on the nightstand at 2:54. I picked it up, and there were 3 messages from an unknown number, all sent at 2:53. The first was a single word, listen. The second was a timestamp, 3:01. The third was blank. I tracked the number in a reverse lookup, and it came back unassigned. I deleted the messages, locked my phone in a drawer, and told myself I wasn't going to let it change anything. I slept, and for once I didn't wake up until morning. The boxes were still taped, the plans still in motion. Relief was a physical thing. For one day I felt like the world was normal and that I could breathe. That night at 2:59 I heard the footsteps again. I kept my eyes on the clock. At 3 o'clock the whisper, the scrape, the pause. At 3:01 I felt the bed shift, like someone had sat down at the edge of it. I didn't see a shadow. I didn't hear a voice. I felt the weight, small and deliberate, like a polite stranger sitting to speak with you. I turned toward the sound. My head flicked to the side, to where someone's knees would be if they were sitting on the bed. The air felt colder there. My sheets were slightly rumpled, as if someone had rolled the edge under their leg. I swallowed. "Who are you?" I asked. It felt foolish, even as the words left my mouth. The pause after was a long one, heavy as water. Then, a voice so close to my ear I felt the breath on the shell, not a whisper, not a word, but a pressure of air, and I heard the phrase, "Not yet. Not yet." It wasn't an order. It wasn't a threat. It was a waiting. It felt like someone telling me a secret that only they understood. There was a time to look and a time not to. And for reasons I couldn't name, I obeyed. I lay very still until morning. The move was canceled the next day. I told myself I was exhausted, that the stress of packing had worn me down. I paid the deposit back and made excuses about timing and money. I installed an extra lock on my door and bought a motion sensor light for the hallway outside my apartment. It made a hollow tick that sounded like a clock when it engaged. It seemed silly, but the sensor picked up nothing at 3 a.m. I started to notice other people behaving oddly. The pigeon-feeding old man stopped coming out of his door after dark. The nurse who lived below me moved her evening shift to days. The couple that argued outside? They started sleeping at different times. People who had been part of the fabric of the building began to alter their lives in small ways none of them talked about. It was as if something in the building asked for hush and neighbors answered without meeting eyes. One night, a month after the not yet incident, I woke to the smell of coffee. I don't drink coffee at night. I turned on the light and the kitchen smelled like the corner diner. Cups were set neatly on the counter. A single saucer with 3 spoon marks in the sugar bowl. The note on the fridge said, in neat block letters, "Tonight, no signature." No other marking. I kept the note on my fridge for a while. I took photos of it and sent them to myself as if by evidence I could make it more real. I taped it inside a book and forgot about it. Over the following weeks, the notes changed. Sometimes they were a single word, soon, quiet, wait. Sometimes they were more specific. Don't answer the knock, or do not turn the camera. There were no threats. There was no violence, only instruction. Once I found a small lump of salt on my windowsill, perfectly shaped like a fingertip. Once I opened my mailbox and found a single Polaroid of my front door, the photo taken from the angle of the stairwell with the film's border bitten and the date scratched off. The picture had been taken the night before at 3:01, according to my phone's timestamp. I stopped sleeping. I started working from home more often so I could be there for a day and notice whether the apartment rearranged itself. My friends stopped inviting me out. They told me I looked different, like I was waiting for something they couldn't see. I began to feel like the building was breathing around me, holding its breath at certain times. Some nights I could hear faint humming, as if someone were walking the halls with a radio turned on low. Other nights were silence so absolute it had texture. 2 weeks ago, I left for the store at dusk and came home to find the hallway light burned out. My key turned in the lock. I pushed the door open and found every light in my apartment off. The silence was a blanket. On the couch, a blanket I didn't own. On the coffee table, 3 glasses of water. I turned them over with my hand without thinking, and inside the rim of each glass was a single hair, dark and short, placed in the center like a punctuation mark. That night I slept with the door open a crack and the hall's dim light spilling in. At 2:58 I heard the steps. They came up the stairwell, slow, 5 steps, pause, 5 steps. They stopped. I couldn't feel anything in the room. Then, at 3:01, a knock. 3 soft knocks, measured, at my bedroom door. I stood there, eyes wide in the green of my phone's night camera. The knocks were like someone trying to be polite. I walked toward the door, heart jerked in my throat, and as my hand touched the knob, the knock started again from somewhere behind me. 3 soft knocks from the kitchen. I didn't look. I made my hand into a fist and put it against the door and whispered, "Not yet," the same words that had been whispered to me weeks before. The knocks didn't stop. For a long time they repeated, "Kitchen, door, kitchen, door." Then they slowed. Then they stopped. I don't know how long I stood there with my hand on the knob. The only thing I remember clearly is the sound of my own breathing, and how instantly I could hear every other little noise I had long ago learned to ignore. A drain at the neighbor's sink, a truck 2 blocks over, the building's old bones settling. In the morning there was a note taped to my door, no handwriting. Just the same ballpoint block letters. Good, it said. Until next time, I moved the following week. I told myself leaving would be the cure. I packed every box, moved them to the new apartment 3 blocks away, and for the first week it felt like relief. The boxes were heavy with the things that belonged to a person, mugs, books, photographs. I unpacked slowly, like a person making a new life. For the first few nights there were no steps, no whispers, no notes. I started to sleep. I let myself believe it was over. On Wednesday morning, a week after moving, I opened a drawer and found a folded slip of paper at the bottom. I had unpacked every single thing and, until then, hadn't found anything that could have been left behind. On the paper were 2 words, same building. I have reported things. I have told the landlord at my old building. He says he checked his logs and found nothing. I have called the police, but there are no crimes to report. Only noise complaints and some neighbors too old to remember exact times. Nobody has been able to explain the footsteps or the notes or the sense that someone chooses a moment to enter a life. The oddest part is the way it isn't cruel. It doesn't seem to want to destroy things. It rearranges, it suggests, it waits. It keeps its own calendar. When I fell asleep last night, I dreamed of numbers. 5. Pause. 5. I woke and looked at my phone. The time was 3:01. My new apartment's hallway was quiet. There was no scrape, no whisper. On my nightstand, under my lamp, an envelope lay there that wasn't there before. Inside, a single Polaroid of a door. The date on the back matched the day I moved in here. Written across the white margin in the same neat handwriting. Soon. I don't know what soon means. I don't know why this thing, whatever it is, picks moments and waits and tells me not to look. I don't know whether it's patient or ceremonial, benevolent or indifferent. I only know that ordinary life keeps folding back into that pattern. Small noises, polite steps, a whisper in the dark that tells you to hold still. The way it waits has become the new background hum I can't tune out. If you're telling this a laugh, if you want an explanation that makes sense in the light, please let it be that I am tired and fertile for coincidence. Believe that if it helps you sleep. But if you've ever heard someone at the other end of the hall who shouldn't be there, if you've ever had a note in the margin of your books that you do remember, writing if the world ever tells you to be quiet at a certain hour, then you, know the sound I'm listening for. The last thing I want to say is that I have stopped setting my alarm. I don't know why. I don't want to know why. Tonight, when the clock passes 3, I'll be listening. When I hear 5 steps and a whisper, I'll try very hard to obey. Maybe not yet means I'm not ready. Maybe it means I'm safe for now. Maybe it means nothing at all. Maybe it's just waiting for the right moment. This happened to me the summer I was 22. I drove down alone with a backpack, a cooler, and a stack of paperbacks. The house sat at the end of a narrow lane, a little out of town. When I pulled up, it was exactly as advertised, sun-faded paint, a sagging porch swing, a wind chime of seashells that barely moved. The owner was an older man who handed me a ring of keys and didn't pry when I asked about neighbors. Quiet area, he said. Mostly families, a couple of fishermen. You'll like it. The first few days were everything I wanted. I'd wake before dawn, sit on the porch with my coffee, and watch the horizon lighten. The world felt very simple and very big at once. At night, I left a lamp on in the living room and a fan by the window. The hum made the dark feel less dense. I walked the beach at sunset and collected bits of downed sea glass. If I heard someone else, it was distant, a car, the faint thump of bass from a far-off house, nothing that touched the stillness of the place where I slept. About 3 days in, I started noticing small things, little noises that didn't belong to the ocean. The first was during the day. I was in the kitchen making lunch when I heard a soft tap coming from the back of the house, like knuckles against wood. I figured it was the wind or a branch scraping the siding. The windows were shut, but the windows rattled sometimes. I told myself the house was settling, that old houses make sounds. I kept telling myself that because it was easier than thinking about someone being there. That night, while I was reading, something brushed across the porch, a whisper of motion. I went to the door and peered out. A small set of footprints led from the far corner of the yard to the edge of the porch and stopped at the first step. They were bare, small, like someone had run up and hesitated. There were no other marks, no footprints leaving. I took a photo because it felt strange, and because I wanted proof to show a friend later, something to laugh about. I cleaned up the sand, wiped the step with my sleeve. The wood was cool under my hand. I told myself kids from the nearby houses must have sneaked over. That was the neat, clean explanation I wanted. The next morning, the footprints were gone. The step was dry and smeared as if someone had walked through a puddle and then walked away. I pressed my palm to the wood where the print had been and felt nothing. The sand in the yard was smooth. There were no cars on the lane, no voices. The chime of seashells was still. I stood there for a long time, trying to find the logic. I found a small smudge on the step and told myself to stop being dramatic. A week in, things shifted in ways that were less easy to rationalize. I started waking up at the exact same time every night, 2:43 in the morning, no alarm, nothing in my dreams. At first, it was because of a noise I couldn't place, a faint scraping, as if something with claws was drawing across the inside of the house. It was so soft I would imagine it. The fan's rhythm helped erase it. I would lie there, counting the seconds between waves, trying to force myself back to sleep. On the fourth night of waking at 2:43, I finally sat up and turned the lamp on. The living room was a pool of yellow. I could see my own shadow long and crooked across the floorboards. The scraping sound had stopped. In the doorway, the hallway to the bedrooms, was a rectangle of deeper darkness. I remember thinking, with a clarity that still sticks to me, that I could stand up, walk to the door, and everything would make sense. That thought, the conviction that standing up would fix it, was terrifying in its certainty. I lay back down and listened. The house breathed around me. The ocean was a distant, steady drum. Somewhere far away a dog barked once. Then, from the hallway, a single, small sigh, like someone exhaling behind a closed door. Not the house settling, not the wind, a human breath. It was a sound I knew intimately, the sort of sound you make when you've been holding something and finally let it go. I did not move. I told myself out loud that it was the cat from the house 2 doors down. I told myself that because saying it made my heart slow, just enough to stop the panic from taking over. In the morning, there was a damp patch on the hallway floor near the bedrooms. I saw it by the light and paused, because it looked like a place where someone had stood and the floor had cooled. The owner later told me the house had old plumbing, that humidity got trapped between the boards. It was a plausible answer, clean and sensible. I believed it for the rest of the day. The sounds escalated subtly. The tapping at the back came again, but now it was upstairs as well, like slow, deliberate footsteps above the ceiling that stopped whenever the fan kicked into a high speed. Once, I stood at the base of the stairs and listened to the faint scuff of something moving from one end of the attic to the other. When I climbed the stairs and pushed open the attic door, nothing was there but an old trunk and a pair of damp gloves someone had left in a corner. The gloves were small, fingertip worn, as if they'd been used often. I left them where they were. I tried to leave the house as I had found it, tidy, normal. People asked me later why I didn't leave. Why didn't I pack up and go the first time something felt off? The answer is always the same and unsatisfying. Small things don't feel like danger until they pile up. A drip, a footstep you could forgive, an odd smell that doesn't quite land. You make excuses because leaving a place you chose feels like admitting you were wrong, and admit too much, and you look foolish to yourself. There was one afternoon when everything froze. I'd gone down to the water to clear my head. A storm had passed offshore. Gulls wheeled low. When I came back, the front door was unlocked. I remembered locking it. The key ring ID hung on the hook by the door was where I always put it, except this time, one of the keys was missing. It was a small key with a brass head, nothing fancy, probably for the back shed. I held it up and saw the tiny nick on the side where it had been rubbed smooth. The brass felt warm. The living room smelled faintly of cigarette smoke, which I don't even allow in my apartment. I could see the smudge of a handprint on the top of the lamp table, as if someone had set their palm down there just a minute ago. The hair on my arms lifted. I called the owner, and he said, like a man telling an inconvenient truth, that a relative often came to clean and had a key. She usually comes before you arrive, though, he said. Maybe she swung by. Houses get aired out. I wanted to accept that. I wanted to be practical. I told him it was fine. That night, I dreamt I was walking across the beach, and my feet sank into sand that smelled like the house. old paper, mothballs, the metallic tang of salt. I woke up with the fan off. My phone read 2:43. The lamp was still on from when I'd been reading. The hallway was a band of shadow. I could hear a faint humming, like someone singing with their lips barely moving. It was close to the back door. I told myself to go look. My hands were shaking, but I was angry at myself for pretending to be brave and decided to follow the sound. The back door opened into a small scrubby yard, and beyond that, dunes. The door was unlocked. The sand on the threshold had small impressions across it, like something had dragged. I stepped out, the night air thick with salt. Nothing moved but a loose piece of rope on the post, gently swaying. I could see the faint silhouette of a person on the beach, maybe 100 meters away, hunched, looking inland. I called out without thinking. The figure didn't move. When the neighbor later said there were no other houses allowed on the stretch after dusk, it meant nothing comforting to me. I started to find small misplaced things. A lone shoe on the porch, the size of a child's, a folded piece of paper with a single line written, "Don't to wake them," in a hand I didn't know. Once, in the bathroom, I found a thin smear of lipstick on the mirror, as if someone had blown a kiss and left it there. I scrubbed it away. I left it because I didn't know whether to show anyone. The first time I heard someone whisper my name, it was so faint I thought the wind was forming the syllables. But there was an urgency to it, a cadence like someone trying to get the attention of a person who'd stopped listening. I froze. The voice wasn't right. It wasn't a neighbor's friendly call or an approaching drunk. It had a pattern: breathe, whisper, wait, over and over. I remember watching the curtains move without any breeze and knowing with an animal certainty that I was not alone. I set up the motion camera I bought for hiking and accused myself silently of being paranoid as I strung it up in the hallway. The camera's little red light stared like an eye as if daring anything to move. That night, I slept with the house alarm on, even though it was a flimsy system and the lights on. I woke to the camera blinking low battery. I checked the footage in the morning because I needed to see reason. It showed me waking up, reaching for the lamp, pacing, going back to bed. Then, at 2:42 a.m., the hall was empty. A shadow crossed the far doorway. The footage is grainy, but you can see something pause there, like a person standing very still. At 2:43, the screen flashed. 2 frames, the view from the hallway turned as if a camera had swiveled. And then there was a quick blurred movement close to the lens. The next image was me, still in bed, breathing. There was no sign of anyone entering or leaving. No footprints on the porch. I told myself it was a trick of pixels, a camera artifact. I told myself it was nothing. But the feeling in my chest changed. I started eating standing up, pacing with a cup of coffee in my hand, because the house felt like a mouth waiting to close. The last week I was there, I heard someone humming under their breath on and off through the day. It wasn't a tune I knew. It threaded through the house, in the sink, behind the shower curtain, through the dryer vents. Once, while I was rinsing a cup, the humming stopped and then resumed at the exact pitch of the squeaking wood above the sink. I dropped the cup. It didn't shatter. The morning I decided to leave came like a shrug, ordinary and sudden. I packed the car in a flurry of motion, not calm, but determined. I left the keys in the bowl by the door. I locked the door behind me because habit is the last comfort we have when fear looms. As I walked down the lane, I told myself I was being dramatic, that I'd missed deadlines and needed to be back to work. I eased into the car and drove away. A few days after I left, I couldn't stop myself from going back. I told myself closure that I wanted to collect the things I'd left behind. I parked on the lane and walked up. The house looked asleep. The wind chime turned in a way the sun made it glitter like a thin laugh. The porch swing moved slightly, no one sitting in it. I unlocked the door with a spare key. I'd hidden under the stoop because I always hid a spare key. Because the world is built on small superstitions. Inside, the air was cooler. The house smelled like it always had, sea salt and old wood. On the kitchen table, where I had left a paperback, there was a small pile of neatly folded fabric. A blanket? No, several baby clothes, folded into a tight square, as if someone had been packing for a child. The sight of them hit me with a weight I couldn't place. My hands went numb. There was no toy, no note, nothing else. I called out. The house answered with echoes and nothing else. Then, from the hallway, the faintest sound, a rhythm of soft steps, as if someone small was circling a room. My throat closed. I walked toward the sound and saw the hallway mirror fogged from someone breathing close enough to leave a mark. The fog was at height, not adult, not child, somewhere in between, like a person had leaned over an unknown edge and breathed their presence into the glass. I left without taking anything. I slammed the door and kept my foot on it until the ringing in my ears cooled. I didn't look back as I walked to the car. There was no one on the porch when I finally let go. I think about the house still. Sometimes I find my hand drifting to check the lock. Sometimes I wake up at 2:43 and lie in the dark, imagining the hallway lit by that thin, impossible breath. The owner texted me months later, asking if I remembered the little footprints. He said a family had taken the place and that their daughter, small, quiet, loved to sleep by the back door and watch the waves. He said they found a small patch of disturbed sand every morning and that sometimes at night a soft humming would start and stop without warning. There are a lot of ways to make sense of what I saw. Maybe I made it up. Maybe I missed things. Maybe an old house and the sea and a too quiet mind conspire to invent presences where none exist. Maybe someone did have a relative who wandered through the rooms. But sometimes, when the night is very still, I can close my eyes and hear the scrape of something small across a wooden floor, the whisper of a name, a breath leaving the dark. I don't know what waited in that house or who it belonged to. I only know the shape of the feeling, small, patient, and very near. If you ever find yourself alone in a place that was once lived in, listen for the 2:43 breathing. If you hear it, don't stand up to look. Don't follow the sound out into the cold. Close the lamp, hold your breath, and let the house keep its secrets. Because some things don't want to be seen. They only want to know that you're still there. This happened to me when I was 19. My friends and I decided to rent a beach house for a weekend getaway, a little escape from the bustle of college life. The house was old, a weathered relic that creaked with age, nestled at the edge of a secluded beach. I remember the first time we arrived. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the sand, and the salty breeze filled the air with a sense of freedom. It felt so perfect, so idyllic. The moment we stepped inside, I noticed how the floorboards groaned beneath our weight, as if the house itself was acknowledging our presence. The walls were adorned with faded photographs of families that had come before us, their smiles frozen in time, oblivious to the stories that might linger within those frames. There was an unsettling charm to it all, but we brushed it off as part of the house's character. That night, after a long day of laughter and swimming, we gathered in the living room. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was soothing, almost hypnotic. As we settled in, I felt a chill creep through the room. I shrugged it off, attributing it to the sea breeze that danced through the slightly open window. We stayed up late, sharing ghost stories, the kind that made you laugh and shiver at the same time. I told them about a friend who claimed to have seen a figure lurking in the shadows of his house at night. We all laughed, but I noticed my friend Sarah's face pale slightly. She had a knack for sensing things, an intuition that often proved to be spot on. Eventually, we decided to call it a night. I headed to my room, which was at the far end of the hallway. The house seemed to settle around me as I lay in bed, the faint sounds of the ocean lulling me to sleep. But as I drifted off, I was jolted awake by a sound soft, almost imperceptible, but distinct. It was a gentle tapping, like fingernails against wood. I sat up, straining to hear. The tapping continued, rhythmic and deliberate. My heart raced as I glanced at the door, half expecting to see someone standing there. But the hallway was dark, and the only light came from the moon filtering through the window. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, but the sound persisted, growing louder as if someone or something was trying to get my attention. I crept out of bed, my bare feet meeting the cold floor. The air felt different, heavier, charged with an unspoken tension. I opened my door and peered down the hallway. The darkness seemed to swallow the light, and the tapping had stopped, leaving an eerie silence. I took a deep breath and stepped into the hallway. The floor creaked beneath me, each step echoing in the stillness. I made my way to the living room, where the faint glow of our leftover candles flickered. The atmosphere felt off. It was as if the house was holding its breath. As I entered the living room, I noticed something strange. The window was wide open, the sheer curtains billowing like ghostly hands reaching out. I was sure I had closed it before heading to bed. I walked over to shut it, the cold air sending a shiver down my spine. Just as I turned to leave, I felt a cold breath against my neck, like someone was standing right behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty room, the shadows playing tricks on my eyes. I shook my head, trying to dispel the rising panic. "It's just the wind," I whispered to myself. I returned to my room, locking the door behind me. I lay back in bed, the tapping sound now replaced by the rhythmic heartbeat of the house. Sleep was elusive, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had just experienced. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I decided to brush it off, laughing it off with my friends over breakfast. "I thought I heard something last night," I joked, but the unease lingered. Sarah, however, didn't laugh. She looked at me, her expression serious. "I felt it too," she said quietly. Like someone was watching us. We spent the day at the beach, the sun shining brightly, but the unease never fully left me. As dusk approached, we returned to the house. The atmosphere felt thicker, and I noticed Sarah glancing nervously at the shadows that danced along the walls. We decided to play some games to lighten the mood, but as the night wore on, the laughter faded, replaced by a palpable tension. Later that night, I found myself unable to sleep again. The house creaked in familiar ways, but this time the tapping returned. It was softer now, like a whispering plea. I lay still, the sound wrapping around me, growing louder, more insistent. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and I finally mustered the courage to get up. I opened my door, the hallway engulfed in darkness, and stepped out once more. The candles had burned low, casting flickering shadows that danced like specters on the walls. The tapping was now accompanied by something else, a faint, almost imperceptible whispering, like voices carried on the wind. I followed the sound, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity. It led me down the hall, past the living room, and to the back door. I hesitated, the darkness beyond the door stretching out like a void. I could feel the cold air seeping in from the crack beneath the door. With a trembling hand, I turned the knob and pulled the door open. The night air hit me like a wave, cold and salty. I stepped outside, the sand cool beneath my feet. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me, and I squinted into the darkness, trying to catch a glimpse of anything. But all I saw was the vast expanse of the beach, the waves crashing rhythmically against the shore. I felt a growing sense of dread, the whispers now turning into urgent calls. I wanted to run back inside, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A shadow darted between the trees lining the beach. My breath caught in my throat, and I turned to run back inside, slamming the door behind me. I locked it, my heart racing, and leaned against it, trying to calm my breathing. As I stood there, the tapping returned, now louder, more frantic, as if whatever was outside was desperate to get in. I could feel the house vibrating around me, the walls almost alive with tension. I stumbled back into the living room, waking my friends in a panic. "Something's out there." I gasped, but they dismissed me, chalking it up to my overactive imagination. Sarah sat up, her eyes wide, and whispered, "What did you see?" Before I could answer, a loud bang reverberated through the house, shaking the windows. We all jumped, fear coursing through us. The whispers intensified, and I could swear they were calling my name now. We crowded together, fear pooling in the pit of my stomach. As we tried to figure out what to do, the lights flickered, casting long shadows across the room. Then, just as suddenly, everything went quiet. The whispers faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that felt suffocating. We huddled together, eyes darting around the room, waiting for something to happen. Minutes felt like hours, the tension building with every passing second. Just when I thought it was over, a low, guttural growl echoed from the hallway. It was a sound unlike anything I had ever heard, primal and filled with malice. I felt my blood run cold. We all exchanged terrified glances, and in that moment we knew we had to leave. We bolted for the door, but as we reached for the handle, it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as we tugged and pulled, but it felt as if something was holding it closed. The growling intensified, and we could hear the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching from the darkness. I could see the shadows shifting along the walls, and I realized with horror that whatever was in the house with us was drawing closer. Just as I thought we were trapped, the door suddenly swung open, and we stumbled out into the night, the cold air hitting us like a slap. We ran down the beach, our hearts pounding, not daring to look back. We didn't stop until we reached the car, gasping for breath. As we drove away, I glanced back at the house, now just a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in one of the windows, watching us leave. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that something was waiting for us in that house, something that wanted to be found. We never spoke about it again, but the memory lingers, haunting me in the quiet moments, reminding me that some places are better left undisturbed. And every time I hear the sound of waves crashing against the shore, I can't help but wonder what truly lies beneath the surface.